Welcome, everyone, to the Bull Takes Scouting Podcast. It's draft week. It feels like after months of just grinding the tape and everything, it's finally upon us. And at the same time, you feel like it's taken so long to get here, but then every year you're also like, wow, it's finally here. So today is the final episode of the podcast before the draft. Of course, we'll be analyzing the draft after the fact. But today we're going to be breaking down our positional rankings and really focusing on where we would differ from consensus and where we differ from each other, and have a couple of scout versus scout conversations on some debates there.
Yeah, so like Costa said, we're going to be focusing on mostly where we tend to disagree with each other and where we differ from consensus. If you want to see our full positional rankings for every player that we scouted, that's on our Instagram page. We'll be bringing up our top 12 at each position just for this episode. So I think, without further ado, we can get started. And we'll start off with quarterbacks. So we're bringing up our quarterback positional rankings, and honestly, Costa, we're really similar in our rankings, and that's really surprising. A lot of the past years, we've been off on at least one or two of the top quarterbacks, at least a little bit. But this year, we're basically neck and neck with both our grades and our rankings of players, all the way until you get down to 12 with Sam Ellinger and Shane. I can't say his last name, but I think that the thing that stands out with our quarterback rankings is Mac Jones down at number 5 with a third round grade. So maybe you can start on why we have him there.
And we talked about this last night, so I'm just going to keep it brief. For me, it's just the lack of special arm talent or athleticism, and just the fact that I thought the ball placement was pretty inconsistent. So was the pass rush awareness, and so as a 1-year starter with so much talent on his sides, I think he's going to be facing a harsh adjustment to the NFL, and the ceiling is not that of the top 4 quarterbacks in the draft anyway.
Yeah, I agree. The ball placement for me was the biggest thing. A lot of people in draft media say that he's a very accurate passer, and I just disagree. I think there's a lot of his completion percentage, if you look at strictly stat-wise, is good. But the issue is, if you break down the tape and watch the tape, there's a lot of plays, at least in my opinion, where I see his wide receivers have to adjust to the ball, have to come back for the ball, stop. Especially Jalen Waddle, as we know, he's a extremely fast, deep threat player, and there are multiple deep and even intermediate balls where I saw Waddle have to slow down, stop his route, or even come back. And when he started running the route, it was a surefire touchdown. But because of Mac's inconsistent ball placement, and especially on the deep ball, he would come back and he'd get tackled short of the goal line.
Yeah, I agree, and I think we can move on to the running back rankings right now.
Yeah, so as I pull up the running back rankings, is there anything else that you just want to bring up about the QB rankings?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been a while since we really touched on the QB2 debate. I just think that Zach Wilson really solidified himself over Justin Fields, and it's not that we dislike Justin Fields. We both think that they're surefire franchise quarterbacks at the next level. It's just when you watch the 2020 tape, Zach Wilson is just farther along in his development as a quarterback than Justin Fields, in my opinion. I think he's got a lot of athleticism, arm strength, and especially improvisational ability. But it's really just the really consistent ball placement, decision making, etc., where he's a step above Justin Fields right now.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not going to reiterate what you said, but I think he's a stellar prospect. His tape was near perfect in 2020, and I think people try to hate on him because he didn't play the top level of competition, but just the tape speaks for itself. Regardless of the level of competition, he could fit the ball into tight windows. He has really good arm talent. Some people say he doesn't have elite arm strength. I beg to differ. I think he doesn't have the Mahomes, Josh Allen arm strength, but it's really good. I think he can throw a 60-yard ball down the field. And I think he'll be those top 3 guys. I really think will be really good quarterbacks at the next level. So moving on to our running back rankings now. Our running back rankings went away. Hold on. Well, you can just start talking about the guys that we have at the top for the running back rankings as I pull them up again.
Yeah, you'll see that we really see eye to eye on the running backs, similar to the quarterbacks. We've got the same top three with Harris and ETN and then Javonte Williams, and we really like that top three. I think Harris is just a future Pro Bowler for sure. I just had the tough, physical interior running, but also the shiftiness he possesses, and then the really good ability as a receiver is impressive. And Travis Etienne, really a dynamic slashing running back with Alvin Kamara like potential. Javonte Williams is really a great combination of quickness and contact balance. So those three guys can really be feature backs to the next level. And then you've got a couple other guys who can really be like more like 1B options, Michael Carter and Trey Sermon and Kenneth Gainwell. But you can see that we really agree on these running back rankings. So I don't think we'll stick on this too long.
Yeah, I think once you get past the top 6 for us, it does start to differ a little bit. I know Hubbard from Oklahoma State was a guy that people liked coming into the 2020 season. He had a down year. And I really see, maybe a 1B guy at best. I don't think he's going to be a top ball carrier in the league. But yeah, other than that, I don't think there's too much to touch on when it comes to the running back rankings. Now, moving on to our wide receiver rankings, we agree with Jamar Chase at 1. And I think that's kind of the consensus around the NFL. Jamar Chase is the best wide receiver in this draft. He's the best wide receiver in the past couple drafts, at least, from the ones I've scouted. We differ at 2, though, with Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle. Although we do have the same grade on both Smith and Waddle, we have 1.4 and 1.4. I have Waddle above Smith, and you have Smith above Waddle. So maybe you can touch on why you have Smith there, and then I'll touch on why I have Waddle.
Yeah, same grade, but really makes a big difference because I think there'll be a couple teams, or at least definitely one team, maybe the Miami Dolphins, that's going to end up having to pick between them. So, I mean, it makes all the difference who you have ranked against above the other. And for me, I know what you're going to say about Jalen Waddle. He's got a fantastic combination of speed and explosiveness and shiftiness, the whole athletic profile. He's not just that straight line guy like Henry Ruggs kind of is. He really just has all the fluidity and hip change of direction, etc. And he really came on in the first 4 games of 2020 before getting hurt and showed development in his route running, contested catch ability, and that gives you confidence that he's going to be able to be that complete receiver and that dynamic threat that isn't one-dimensional at the next level, which is why I have the 1.4 on him. That being said, Devontae Smith, man, we just got the full year of him just shredding apart defenses, and he's just a football player. Like, he's not the biggest, he's not the most athletic, he's still very athletic, but he's just extremely well-rounded and a great football player. He really good route running, great acceleration, good enough deep speed, a lot of toughness because he'll go up and get the contested catch. Amazing leaping ability to do so. And the length that he has too. He might not be big, but the catch radius is insane. So for me, I think Jalen Waddle is just a little riskier because it's a small sample size of that elite play that gives you confidence in him being a superstar at the next level. And for Devontae Smith, it's like I just don't have any doubt in my mind. I don't care about the size. He's tough. He plays through route contact. He was durable throughout his time at Alabama. He's not quite as good as Jamar Chase, in my opinion, but I have him as my number 2 over Waddle for those reasons.
Yeah, so I'm not really going to touch on much of Waddle's talent from a scouting report perspective. You kind of touched on that already. But some of the reasons I do have Waddle over Smith, I understand what you said about only a 4-game sample size, and that's when Smith had the whole year. But Waddle was also really good in 2019, and people seem to forget that both these guys were really good in 2019, and it just happened that there'll be at least 4 first-round picks at wide receiver from that 2019 Alabama offense. So I'm not too worried about the risk of, he only really showed up for 4 games. I think he showed all his skills and all his talents in 2019. It just wasn't front and center because they had the 2 guys, Jerry Jeudy and Henry Ruggs there. For me, Waddle, I think Smith is you could make the argument that he might be a little bit better with the ball in his hands in space, but I think that Waddle is almost the same as Smith. And what it came down to for me was I think Waddle has more. He's going to fit into more offenses, in my opinion. I feel like Smith, you might have to base a scheme around him a little bit more, just due to his size, weighing in at 166. That was also a little another reason why I have him beneath Waddle.
I gotta disagree, man. I think if you're playing football, he fits into your team. He can adapt to whatever your offensive scheme is. He can run whatever route you ask him to run. He'll go up against whatever corner you ask him to go up against. I don't have any concerns in terms of how many teams does he fit into.
Well, I probably said that incorrectly. I think he would fit into all 32 teams' offense. I think, but with him, I think if you watched at Alabama, a lot of his touches were scheme touches. And I think with Waddle, you don't have to scheme touches as much or like manufacture touches. I think you'd have to do that more for Smith than Waddle. And I'd rather have a guy that I say, okay, I don't have to manufacture 10 touches for him a game. I can just say, go run this route and you'll get open and you'll get the ball. I'm not saying that Smith can't do that because he can. I just think Waddle can do that better than Smith. And along with his speed, for me, those were the two main reasons why I have Waddle above Smith.
I think Waddle did that better than Smith for 4 games of his college career. Because I think in 2019, you're saying Waddle is good, but Waddle just both his route running and his contested catch ability were just not the level that we saw in those 4 games in 2020. I think Smith was the better receiver in 2019, and so for me, it is that really small sample size of Waddle being better than Smith. And for me, Smith just played the whole year, demolished everyone. And yeah, there were a lot of manufactured touches, and Steve Sarkisian's brilliant play calling gave him a boost in production, but he still would have been immensely productive without it. And if you just never manufacture any touches for him, he'll still be dominant because he can set up any defensive back on any route. But I mean, I think that unless you have anything else to say, that kind of shakes out our debate on the wide receiver too. And if you look after that, we really do have almost the identical picks with actually numbers 4 through 9 being the same, because in general it's a really deep wide receiver class, and the amount of guys there that we have second round grades on after having 4 or 5 first round talents is really tells you how good this wide receiver class is.
Yeah, like you said, it's a great wide receiver class. I think some other guys' names that we can bring up. Rashad Bateman, we talked about him last night about being a possible surprise first round pick. He's a guy that we've been high on pretty much the whole process. It seemed to me like he kind of, tapered off for most of the draft season, and he was kind of more thought of as a second round pick. We have him solidly in the first round conversation. I know you like him a little bit more than I do. So what were some of the things that you saw in Bateman while everyone else was saying he was a second round receiver?
Well, I don't think he has the incredible explosiveness and speed that some of the other guys in this class have, but he is one of the best route runners in the class, and he's really physical. Not the absolute biggest, but still decent size and great physicality, where he'll just bully the opposing cornerback. And he's got more than enough athleticism. It's not amazing, but it's definitely good enough. And so I see that ability to separate on an elite level. And that's what translates to the NFL at the end of the day, with the route running and physical handwork that he has, and definitely enough of an athletic profile. He gets open consistently, and I think that'll happen in the NFL. So he could be a guy where maybe he's the 5th, 6th wide receiver taken, and you're like, well, the 1 or 2 guys above him just didn't turn out nearly as good, even if they have good careers. I just think Rashad Bateman has like true Pro Bowl potential.
Yeah, I agree. I think this combination of size and route running are, a really special combination. Like you said, he doesn't have the explosiveness, but that's because he's a bigger wide receiver than the other 3 guys that we have ahead of him. And I think now we can move on to our tight end rankings. And our tight end rankings, we have the same guy at the top, along with everyone else that scouted the 2020 class, a 2021 class at all, and that's Kyle Pitts. And
he's my number 1 non QB. Is he yours?
Yes, yeah, he's been since I watched him the first time around. He popped off the screen. I mean, we don't need to talk about him
I
too
don't think
much
we do.
because I think everybody can read about him and hear what everyone else has to say. I think the conversation for our tight end rankings though comes down to our tight end two, which would be Tommy Tremble for me and Brevin Jordan for you. So for me, what put Tommy Tremble ahead of Brevin Jordan was one his blocking. I'm going to say that he's the best blocking tight end in this class. A lot of people might make the argument that a guy like Freiermuth is a better blocking tight end. I disagree, and we'll touch on him in a second. But his blocking, he can block on the line. He can block split out wide and wide receivers. He can block defensive linemen. He can line up in the backfield as like an H-back and go be a lead blocker. So to me, that's talent that you're not going to teach that. He just has that ability. He's extremely strong. And his route running ability is raw, but he's really athletic, and it just wasn't tapped into at Notre Dame. I think, one, they had tight ends ahead of him like Cole Kmet and Michael Myers, and they, at least Notre Dame, thought they were more talented. Michael Myers was a 5-star recruit. But it was like Tommy Tremble could block, so we'll use you to block and we'll use another tight end to receive the ball, where I think they could have said, we'll use you to block and go catch the ball. And I talked about Tommy Tremble last week in our Guys podcast, so I'm not going to touch on him too much more. But maybe you can give why you have Brevin Jordan ahead of Tommy Tremble.
Yeah, I just think that I don't really want to argue against Tommy Tremble because I mean the 3.1 speaks for itself, especially for a guy who has such little receiving production. I really think that he can be a much better NFL player than a college player because he has all the traits that you're looking for. First of all, an elite blocker, we know that, but when you do see him running routes, he's really athletic. They're really fluid. They're crisp. He's got soft hands. He's a big target. So much potential there. I just think that Brevin Jordan just got a lot more experience as a pass catcher. So I mean, I think that's what it came down to for me, because I think Jordan's not as good a blocker, definitely not, but he's still a good blocker. He's got size, athleticism, length, effort. You got to clean up the technique, but when you have all those things, there's definitely a lot of potential there. And he's a really athletic target. He could probably get more nuance in his route running, but with that size, athleticism, and those hands, I really like him as a receiving tight end. So really, just in both phases of the game, I think he's well above average, and that projects well to the NFL. But today, I did find out that he interviewed kind of poorly with in team meetings, which bothers me. I'm a big guy on all the things that are character, work ethic, interviews, and all that. So I mean I'm not going back and changing anything now because we posted these and these are final and everything, but I probably would have reconsidered Jordan versus Tremble if I had that information firsthand. So, but that's the explanation for why, like strictly on tape, I have Jordan ahead of Tremble, and I think now we can hop into why Pat Freiermuth, who is the number 2 tight end for a lot of people, is our number 4. So, how did you come to that decision?
So to me, when I watched this tape, I kind of, assumed that, oh, he's the tight end 2 in this draft class. He's probably, I would assume that he's a good receiver, but to me, he's not. I don't think he's going to be a good receiver at the next level. Sure, he has reliable hands, but I don't think that he's a really good route runner. He kind of lacks that athleticism that you want to see in today's modern tight end. And I said, okay, well, if he's not a good receiver, maybe he'll at least be a really good blocker. And he's a good blocker, but not a great blocker. I think he can get pushed around a little bit at times. And his tape was kind of disappointing. He wasn't a highly touted tight end anywhere close to Pitts, but I still expected a lot more than I saw on film for Pat Freiermuth.
Yeah, I think he's a good blocker. He's just not dynamic. I think we see that some really impressive athleticism from both Jordan and Tremble, which gives them such great upside in the receiving game. I think Freiermuth is just going to be just like a check down option or run short, shallow routes in the 5 to 10 yard range because he's not going to separate at an elite level. He's just not that type of athlete. So he's a guy who might have been better college tight end than NFL tight end. I think he might be a middle of the road NFL tight end. I think his ceiling is really capped, and that's what keeps him behind Jordan and Tremble for me because I think those two have way more upside.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the 3 tight ends that we have ahead of him, those guys can all be dynamic receivers, as well as good to very good blockers. And Freiermuth, his potential's capped, like you said, probably a 5 to 10 yard route guy. I think Pitts, Tremble, and Jordan can all run 25, 30-yard routes down the field. They have
They could all completely stretch the field.
And the route running to do so. So I think that was a great point, that he might be a reliable receiver in the 5 to 10 yard range, but at this point in today's NFL, that's not what you're looking for from a tight end. You're looking for a guy that can block and really stretch the field for a top tier tight end. I agree with you. I think Freiermuth could be a good middle of the road, fringe top 10 tight end, because it really, if you look at the NFL, there's not a lot of super talented tight ends in the league. You have the guys at the top, Kelsey and Kittle, and then other than that, I'd say there's a major drop off. And I think Pitts will be right up there with Kelsey and Kittle within the next 2 years.
Yeah, I think we can move on to the offensive tackle rankings in the interest of time, and you'll put them up in a second. But we really did agree a lot on this position. We have Penei Sewell first, and Rashawn Slater and Christian Darrisaw. You have that first round grade on Tevin Jenkins, and I have that 2.0. But at the end of the day, that's still pretty similar. So it's definitely a solid crop of offensive tackles. Is there anything you want to say before we move on to the next position?
I think I just will touch on quickly why I have Tevin Jenkins with a late first round grade. After we put this up and graded. Put this up on our Instagram page. I did see some reports that some people are concerned about his character, so that might have dropped him down to maybe a 1.9 for me. But there were conflicting reports. But for me, it was really his nastiness as a blocker. I think he's just dominant with, he can put his hands on guys and run them to the ground. You see a ton of pancakes on blocks or on tape, and that's what I really like to see when I'm watching offensive linemen. So I think for a guy that, maybe he doesn't have the greatest technique right now, I think you can still coach it and improve it. But for the amount of pancakes I saw on tape, they just, along with everything else to me, that warranted a late first round pick.
Yeah, I just want to point out, I think that this is a previous version of our offensive tackle rankings. I know the final one that we posted, I have Brady Christensen over James Hudson. But that's just a minor detail. And yeah, Jenkins, I do really like him also. I just think that what kept him out of the first round for me is I think he'll be beat on the edge by some of these talented NFL edge rushers sometimes, because he doesn't get enough depth on his pass drops for me between the lack of length and lack of elite athleticism. I think he'll concede a few battles on the edge, which at the end of the day, he'll still be a really solid tackle for me, probably on the right side of the offensive line, but it's definitely a really good crop of offensive linemen overall. And it's rare to see some tackles that I think are going to be good starters come out of day two, just because teams push up offensive tackles on their draft board because it's just such a need around the league perennially. And this year, there's actually good depth at the position.
Yeah, I think the last thing that I'll just mention as we're bringing up the interior offensive line is going back to Jenkins for a second. I think he's a guy that could move inside as well to guard. We have him listed as a tackle because I think he'll be drafted as a tackle, but if he really struggles on the edge, I think a move inside could be warranted, and I think he'll be a really good guard as well. So now with our interior offensive line rankings.
Yeah, I do first want to say that I think that there's several tackles that could end up moving to guard, which just reinforces how strong this interior offensive line class is, as you can see with the grades that we have on these guys. Because I think guys like Liam Eichenberg, along with Tevin Jenkins, and I think there's a couple others, can't really remember off the top of my head, but there I think a few, Jackson Carman's one of them, a few guys can move into guard and just make this an even stronger interior offensive line class.
Redundant.
Yes, yeah, that's what I was thinking about.
So with our interior offensive line class, obviously Vera Tucker at the top, who was a tackle last year. So speaking about tackles moving into guard, but in 2019 he played guard and he played really well in both years. I just think his length or his lack of length is kind of what are making him move back inside at guard, and I think he'll be a Pro Bowl caliber guard. Where the differential comes is I have Humphrey as my second interior offensive lineman. You have Myers. So maybe if you want to touch on why you have Myers ahead of Humphrey.
Yeah, I just think that everything you can't coach, Josh Myers is a little better than Creed Humphrey. I think he's bigger. He's more athletic. He's longer, and it's not that Creed Humphrey is deficient in any of these areas. I think that the combination of physical and athletic traits is elite for Josh Myers. And I'm surprised that throughout this draft process, he hasn't really received any hype because it's not like his technique is poor. I think Creed Humphreys is better, but and Josh Myers could get better in that area, but it's good right now. And with all of the athleticism, power, size that he possesses, I think he has Pro Bowl potential if he does improve a couple technical glitches he has. I know his hands can get a little wide sometimes, which gives up his chest, and that's something you need to correct as an offensive lineman. But I mean, the baseline is surely there, and he put out some dominant tape. Like you see some of those holes that Trey Sermon ran through at the end of the season, and Josh Myers is completely moving his guy out of the run lane 5 to 10 yards downfield every single time. So he was a large part of the success of that running game had and the offense as a whole. I just don't get why he's not getting that hype. And I mean, all due respect to Creed Humphrey, I think Creed Humphrey is going to be a really good center in the NFL, and that's why I have a high second-round grade on him. I just think Josh Myers is an even better player.
Yeah, so I think for me, Creed Humphreys, I think his athleticism is pretty close to Myers. You say that Myers has really good athleticism. I saw a little struggles when he was getting to the second level at times. So for me, I thought their athleticism was more comparable. I think Myers is more athletic than Humphrey, but to me, it wasn't something to drop Humphreys below Myers for. But for me, the biggest thing, and you brought it up, how Humphreys is more technically refined than Myers. I think from day one, Humphrey will be better, and I think that they might become equal players at the NFL level. But for me, Humphrey's zone blocking skills were really good. As you watch this tape, he showed a great ability to reach block nose tackles that were even a full man down on the line. So that would mean guys that were head up on the guard. And that's something that's really hard to do. And you don't see, even though it's the NFL level, you don't see a ton of guys at the NFL level able to do that as well as I saw Humphreys do it last year at Oklahoma. So to me, his ability in zone blocking, his technique were kind of what bumped him ahead of Myers for me. But I mean, I still have a 2.1 on Myers, and that seems to be a lot higher than what a lot of other people have. So I think we both agree that both Myers and Humphreys will be really good starting centers at the next level.
Yeah, and I do think that the NFL has what we have on Creed Humphrey. I think he's a late first, early second round guy come the weekend and the NFL draft. And I do also just want to say that Wyatt Davis is probably going to be one of the biggest steals of this draft, in my opinion. I think the injury that he sustained at the end of the season has knocked him down boards, and it's looking like he might be available in the third round. And for me, I think you're getting such good value if you get him anywhere, and really anywhere outside the first round is terrific value. So definitely a really good interior offensive line class. Headline at the top by Elijah Vera Tucker, who we both think it can really be a pro bowler in the NFL.
Yeah, and the holes that Trey Sermon had to run through at Ohio State. I mean, Wyatt Davis was right next to Josh Myers. So
yeah, exactly.
It was
both
of them. Clearing one side of the hole. Wyatt Davis was usually the guy clearing the other side. And those holes were massive. You could drive a truck through those. But I think, we can move on from our offensive lines now, and we'll move on to the defensive side of the ball. And we'll start off with defensive tackles. So I think it's a really weak defensive tackle class, in my opinion. I don't think either of us have a guy with a first-round grade. You were back and forth on Barmore. But, we pretty much agree for the most part on the talent of the defensive tackle class. I think a guy that, in my opinion at least, the NFL seems to be pretty low on is Twyman from Pittsburgh. I know he opted out of 2020. But he worked with Aaron Donald. They both are from Pittsburgh, obviously. And you can see some of that in this game. I'm not comparing him to Aaron Donald at all, but you can see some of the pass rush moves that Aaron Donald uses. Twyman also uses. He's a smaller guy, but I think that he has some pretty good potential at the next level.
Yeah, and I think that really it's not a terrible defensive tackle class once you get outside of day one. I think this is probably the normal level. If anything, there's actually a decent amount of guys with day two grades, as you can see on the graphic. but it's so rare to see a defensive tackle class where there really, in our opinion, isn't a first round talent. I had Barmore at a 1.9, and I found out that he's got some character and makeup concerns, so I dropped him to 2.1. And he's kind of a boomer bust guy as a result. So especially considering his really inconsistent play, where sometimes he's a world beater, as we saw in the college football playoff, and sometimes he just isn't really a factor in the game. I think another thing is we have Davion Nixon kind of higher than other people, and I like Levi Onwuzurike. I have a 2.5 on him, but he seems to be the consensus second defensive tackle, and we have Nixon, who I just think has really good athleticism, and his instincts are pretty advanced for his level of experience. So I think he's got some potential.
Yeah, he hasn't really put everything together yet, but I think, with the right coaching and some patience, I think he could be a really, really good defensive tackle. And I wouldn't be surprised to see him looking back a few years from now as the best defensive tackle from this class.
Mm-hmm.
So now we'll just keep it moving, and we'll move on to our edge rushers. We've brought this up multiple times. People are hating on this edge rush class. Both of us disagree. I think it's a really strong edge rush class with a lot of depth to it. So we pretty much agree at the top three guys. We have almost identical grades. You have Pay a little bit higher than I do, so maybe you can spend a few seconds and touch on why you have Pay as a 1.2.
Yeah, Pay is just like my big man crush in this draft. I think, as we know by now, he's just terrific burst off the edge and bend to get around the quarterback, a really good compact build. In 2020, we saw a decent development of pass rush moves. He'll have to keep working on that, but I mean, he's definitely pointing in the upwards direction. And then an incredible effort too, where you see him late in the rep, just use those athletic traits to get to the quarterback. If he hasn't already, he's really active in pursuit, tracks down the ball carrier, and he's a great story as well. I don't think we've ever touched on that, but he was born in a Liberian refugee camp, and I think his grandpa got murdered in the Civil War that was going on at the time there, and so he had to move to America with his mom when he was really young, and they struggled for a little bit. I know she had to work like 2 or 3 jobs when he was in high school just for him to be able to play at whatever private school he was at, so he could get the attention to go to college. And he made that promise that if she's working these jobs for him to go to that high school, he'd be getting a D1 scholarship, which he did. And I mean, he's right on the verge of being able to fulfill this NFL dream and take care of everyone in his family after everything they've been through. So it's everyone says that the character's off the charts, and I mean, it checks out with that story. And so I have no doubt that he's going to go into the NFL. And when you've got a guy that has such amazing physical and athletic traits, and also the effort on the field and the character and work ethic off the field, I see a future Pro Bowler, and I think that so many people are underestimating him, and he could really be a surprise as a guy who's maybe gets picked in the teens, and it's like, how is he not a top 10 pick? Because I mean, I don't think anybody has a top 10 grade on him except for me, from what I've heard, and he's definitely one of the guys I'm highest on in this class.
Yeah, so I think looking at this edge rusher, I think the one thing that might stand out is I have Ronnie Perkins with a 2.3 and you have a 3.1 on him. And I'm not going to talk too much about that because he's another guy that I talked about last week. But to me, the reasons why I gave him a high first or high second round grade was I think he's really an all around player. I think he's really good versus the run and the pass. He displays great play strength. He's explosive off the ball. He shows a great ability to convert his explosiveness and his speed into power and just drive guys back. So I feel like I haven't seen a lot of people with a super high second round grade. I think the consensus is more mid-second to early third where you have them. But I think other than that, that's kind of where our differences lie in the edge rusher class. Anything else you want to say about that?
Yeah, I think also the Joe Tryon is a guy that the NFL certainly knows his abilities, and I think the general public really might not. He opted out in 2020, and he's pretty raw. So I mean, I think there's a wide range of how good he could be in the NFL, but he has great physical and athletic traits where the top end burst and bend off the edge and speed, and so he's definitely a really nice moldable piece of clay that you could turn into a high level edge rusher. And I mean, I think we should touch on Gregory Rousseau because he's a guy who got so much hype because of his extremely productive 2019 season, opted out despite that season being his only one in college. So now he's coming off only 1 year of playing college football, and he opted out, and his pro day was not that good. So it's really a difficult evaluation. And I think that people are kind of seeing him as a boomer bust prospect. I don't think he is. I think it's most likely that he'll be a good NFL starter, not elite, not bad. I don't see the. I don't think it's boomer bust. He can certainly be in the middle because I think that he's got really good length, decent strength, and he clearly knows that he has a knack for getting to the quarterback. I mean, I think that translates to a certain extent, even if he doesn't have great bend off the edge or great pass rushing moves, and he certainly needs to improve in those areas. I think he can still be a decently productive player in the NFL.
Yeah, I think part of the reason why he was ranked so highly or thought of as a possible top 10 pick coming into the 2020 season was obviously, like you said, he's got great physical size. He's 6'7", so he's got great length, and I think obviously the really high sack number. And he looked like he had good athletic traits on film. Obviously, those didn't translate to his testing numbers. I'm not going to talk about him too much because I thought you kind of hit the nail on the head with him. But I think after kind of going back and watching the tape, people said, oh, sure, he had a ton of sacks, but not all of them were, sacks within the first 2-3 seconds of the play. I thought a good amount of them were what you'd call coverage sacks, where the quarterback was hanging onto the ball for 4 or 5, even 6 seconds. I think on at least 2 of them I saw. And it was more of, well, nobody's open. The quarterback's hanging onto the ball. Somebody's got to get to the quarterback, and Rousseau was that guy. And that is a knock, but it's also not at the same time because he still is able to get to the quarterback. It might not be as quickly every single time as you would like, but he still displays that knack of getting to the quarterback and bringing them down, which a lot of guys in the NFL can get to the quarterback, but then it seems like some guys hit the quarterback, disrupt the quarterback, but never actually get that sack. So I still think it's a good trait for him. I just think he was probably hyped up a little bit more than he should have been.
Yeah, and I mean, there's several other guys I would love to talk about on this list, but in the interest of time, I think we've got to move on to the linebackers, which is a really interesting class at the top. If you look at what Alex is about to put up, we've got Micah Parsons as our first linebacker, and let's just talk about him for a second because it seems like he's almost like a polarizing prospect, and I think that he might not be quite as good on the field as he's hyped up to be. I think he's got great size and athleticism, and he will be extremely disruptive as a pass rusher, which is so valuable coming from the second level on the defensive side of the ball. But I think he gets glued on blocks a little too often, and I think that he's pretty inexperienced in coverage, and you have to build that up. So right now, I think he can come in and be really good, but whether or not he actually becomes a pro baller will be dependent on that. And then there's some character concerns where I'm going to say I think they're a little bit overblown. I think that there's been a lot of reports of immaturity and hazing teammates and bullying and stuff like that. And obviously, that's not having a fight with a teammate in a library over like spilled Gatorade on a computer. That's not anything you want to hear. But I take that guy over the guy who's been said to not have a good work ethic or something like that. So I think that I've also seen things that indicate that Micah Parsons probably has grown up, and he's not the same guy in terms of maturity as he was 2 years ago when some of these incidents happened. So I still think that he can be the best linebacker in this class and play to those abilities. And is there anything you want to say about Parsons before we move on to the next guy on our list, David Collins?
I think we could just move on. You kind of said what I was going to say about Parsons, but, the character concerns I don't think are a big issue. I think, maybe hazing teammates in the locker room, maybe not the best thing to do, but I'm not going to say that doesn't happen in any football locker room, regardless of level. I think we can move on to a guy that we both have as our second linebacker, and it seems to surprise a lot of people, Zaven Collins, the linebacker from Tulsa. And for me, just the first time I turned on his tape, I was like, wow, this guy is huge, but he can move. I mean, he played the season, I think, around 260, and he moved like he was 240. I think he has an insane size-speed combination, and I think in this NFL, that's huge because you want a guy that can move, that can, run get sideline to sideline, but they can also, stand up blockers and stand up running backs through the hole. And a guy that's 260, 265 can really do that.
Yeah, he might actually have the best size speed combination in the draft. It's crazy how he can move at the huge size that he has, and I think he's really good against the run, where he really physical, hard tackler, can cover sideline, can get sideline to sideline to make plays. And I think the one thing holding me back on him is that I don't think he's ever going to be a guy that you can really just line up one-on-one in man coverage. Obviously, as big as he is, even if he's really athletic for that size, he's not that shifty or that fluid as some of these smaller linebackers who can take on running backs and tight ends one-on-one. But I mean, he's a really good pass rusher, so you could definitely keep him on the field in on passing downs. If you're using him as a pass rusher and zone defense, he can be a good overhang defender, 10 yards deep. So I think that he's not a guy you have to take off the field on third down. You're probably not lining him up in man coverage, but he could be extremely disruptive and productive in the NFL, and that's why he's our second guy.
Yeah, I like that you brought up that, he's not going to be able to cover guys one-on-one, and, he's not. We're not going to say that he is. He's 265 pounds. He's not going to be able to cover a running back that weighs maybe 212, 215. Yeah. That's just not going to happen. And obviously that's man coverage. I think he does a really good job in zone coverage, like you said, out in the flats, 10, 12 yards deep. I think he can cover that area really well. And he's got really good speed for his size as well, like we already mentioned. So he can cover that area, So I don't have any worries about him in zone coverage. And like you said, he's not a guy that you're going to have to take off the field and on third down, because either A, you can run a zone defense, or B, if you want to run man, you can have him blitz. And he's really disruptive, like you said, as a pass rusher. So I think he really fits into all three facets of the linebacker game really well. So I don't think we need to talk too much more about him. I think a guy that we're both really high on, that the NFL might not be as high on, is Chaz Surratt. We did talk about him 2 podcasts ago, but just again with Chaz Surratt, I think it's the upside. He played quarterback. He went to North Carolina playing quarterback, switched over to linebacker, and has only been playing linebacker for 2 years. And I think you see insane upside, and the brain that he has and his ability to diagnose plays and just go, and he knows where the plays are going. I think that really speaks to the fact that he has a really good concept of offenses, and I think that's due to the fact that he was a quarterback. Any other linebackers that you want to touch on?
No, I think that you said it was Surratt, and I have a scouting report up on our page. So if you want to go look at him in detail and why we're so high on him, you can go do that. And Jamin Davis is really right behind him. I see why the NFL is really all over him, and he might be a first-round pick because he really has really good athleticism to cover sideline to sideline. But I think we can move on to the cornerbacks.
I think maybe one guy that you maybe want to spend a few seconds on really quickly is Monty Rice. I think he's a guy that you have pretty high in accordance with consensus. I have a 4th round grade, and I think that's kind of sounding like where he's going to go 4th round, maybe late 3rd. But you have a mid 2nd round grade on him. So maybe you can just touch on that quickly.
Yeah, and I'm actually more interested in hearing what you have to say, because I don't get what makes him not a starter in the NFL. I think he checks all the boxes. He's not spectacular at anything, and his upside isn't through the roof. But I think he's going to be a solid starter. He's a really safe pick. Good enough athleticism, good enough size, good enough strength, good enough football intelligence. I mean, he's above average in almost every aspect of playing linebacker.
I mean, so to me, honestly, this kind of just comes down to us seeing different things on tape. Because I don't really agree. I think that there were a lot of times where I felt like at least he would struggle to read plays, and he would take some time to diagnose plays and, go fill the run or drop into pass coverage. And to me, that's huge when watching linebackers. I want to see you make the decision 1-2 steps like that. And to me, a lot of the times he wasn't making that within his 1st or 2nd read step. So to me, that kind of puts him at, maybe a developmental linebacker, a guy that could be a really, really solid backup and maybe develop into a starter at the next level. But that was the biggest issue for me for what I saw. And then again, film is subjective at times.
Well,
So
I don't think he was making reads any slower than some of the guys you have above him, like Browning or Cox or Moses.
I mean, that's just what I saw on tape. To me, I did feel like that he
Hmm.
was making reads slower. I saw a lot of times it would take 3 to 4 read steps. But again, that's kind of how film works sometimes, and it's just what it is. It's subjective, and if film wasn't subjective, then everybody would have the same rankings.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's two things. Like sometimes it's you see similar things, you just interpret it differently. I think we saw the same things with Waddle and Smith, just different interpretation on who to rank higher. And then sometimes it is that you just see different things, like with Davis. And I think we can move on to the cornerbacks now, or not Davis. I meant Rice.
Yeah, so we're just getting down to the end here. We'll have cornerbacks and then safeties. And something I want to touch on as we're bringing up the cornerback rankings. I'd say about a month ago was it when we had our conversation about Farley and Surtain, and I took Farley, you took Surtain. But then some stuff came out about Farley's back, and he had back surgery. Doing a little bit of research into that, you know, it was something that he did have flare up before, so I'm just concerned about him having it flare up again at the NFL level. So that is why I dropped him below Surtain. Before the back surgery, I had Farley at a 1.3 and Surtain at 1.4. So this back surgery and that just dropped him down a tenth of a point for me.
Yeah, Farley is tough, man. Like I like the 1.5 I have on him because I think he's got incredible size, speed, quickness, fluidity, instincts, ball skills. Like he checks every single box to be an extremely high level man coverage corner, and that's what makes you one of the best corners in the NFL. He has that upside, but he won't have played football in over 500 days because he opted out in 2020, and he's had back problems that took him out in the last 2 games of 2019. Had to have a surgery right now, and I mean, no back surgery is minor. Like these are things that can keep popping back up. So he's really tough, and it's for reasons that aren't like when you watch his 2019 tape, you want to put a really high grade on him. And I think that at the end of the day, I'll take that leap of faith because the upside he presents is through the roof.
Yeah, I agree, and I think we both have similar grades on him, and I think he's a guy that's going to get drafted lower than the grades we have. So I think we both will give whichever team ends up drafting him. I think we'll end up giving them a good grade on that draft pick because you know the back thing it's an issue. It's not something that you really want to see a player have, but also it's not like he's going to tear an ACL every year. If he needs to sit out a half of a game because his back flared up once in a while, that's something I'm willing to deal with because of the physical skills and the traits that he possesses.
Yeah, and I want to touch on JC Horn, the 2.0 I have on him, and the 1.8 for you was way lower than where he'll go to. So we are against consensus on that one. I mean, he's difficult for me because I could definitely see him proving me wrong. I wouldn't be surprised at all. But at the same time, I just don't see him on the level of Surtain or Farley or even Greg Newsome. Strictly on tape, I know Newsome has some durability concerns that he's going to have to prove differently. But for me, Horn, I think it comes down to just how grabby he is. I think that it's yeah, you can coach it out of him, but he's going to almost have to relearn how to play man coverage because it's after a lot of college cornerbacks have the issue of just grabbing onto receivers too much, and that'll draw flags in the NFL. But I think Horn just does it on almost every rep, and he's I mean you will have to reteach him how to cover without doing that, and he's got really good physical and athletic traits, so he definitely could hit his potential and be a really good man cover a corner, but because you gotta overhaul the technique in man coverage, I have that 2.0 on him.
Yeah, and I'm a little bit higher because of his physical traits. I think that he has the ability to rehaul his man coverage. But I agree with you. Like you said, he's way too grabby for where he is right now. That definitely needs to be changed. And I think his first and second years in the league might be a shock to a lot of people because either one, he's going to get a ton of flags, or two, he's not going to get a lot of flags, but he's going to blow a lot of coverages. as he relearns how to play man. But I think he does really show a good ability in man coverage to stay with guys and mirror wide receivers. But he's definitely a guy that we have a lot lower than it looks like he's going to go. He'll probably be a top 15 pick in the on Thursday. So I don't really think there's anyone else that we need to touch on.
Well, yeah, Kelvin Joseph. Kelvin Joseph was a guy that I had a first round grade on, and then we found out that he is reportedly, take this with a grain of salt, off 20 boards for character concerns. Has won the former NFL scouts like infamous award for worst character in the draft class for just not wanting to work hard, not wanting to really be a team player. Got pushed out the door of at LSU, despite how talented he is, because he just kind of quit on the team and got a suspension in the bowl game for violation of team rules. Then only stayed one season at Kentucky. Obviously, he had the talent to come out, but who knows what was going on behind the scenes there. So he's a guy I would take a flyer on towards the end of round 3 because I just think he's got incredible size and athleticism and length to be a good man coverage corner. But he's got to fix that. So the attitude he has, and that's why if you look at my scouting report, I originally had a 1.8 on him, and now you're seeing a 3.6. If you are confused,
yeah, I think on film he has first round talent, and I also had a late first round grade on him as well. But the character issues were just too big of a concern for me. I think people said, or from what we read. There were things that talked about he didn't really care about football. He was more passionate about creating a music career than a football career. So again, take that with a grain of salt. But he did get kicked off the LSU football team and transferred to Kentucky. But it seems like he'll go.
Well, I don't want to give misinformation. He was not kicked off the LSU team, unless I'm mistaken. He was suspended from the bowl game, and then he transferred out. So he could have been pushed out of the door, but he did not get officially kicked out.
Yeah, you're right. But I think we can kind of, I don't want to assume anything, but, he was suspended from the bowl game and then he left. So take that as you would like.
Exactly. And I think we can move on to the safeties now.
Yeah, so the safety's last position. And right at the top, I think the safety position is the only position out of all the ones that we ranked where we differ at the top guy. So I have Morig as my number 1 safety, and you have Richie Grant. So maybe if you want to touch on why you have a 2.0 on Richie Grant.
Yeah, because, we can debate which one is better. At the end of the day, we actually have the same exact grade on Morig. So we share the same opinion on him in that he's a really extremely athletic, fast, really good in man coverage, which is so valuable for a safety, and great ball skills too. You would like him to be more of an enforcer in the run game. I don't think he's ever going to be really an elite run defender, and also the tackling inconsistencies need to be cleaned up. And I value well-rounded players at any position. I just think Richie Grant is a really well-rounded player, and he might not really be special in any area, but he has the athleticism and the ball skills to be good in coverage. He's got really good effort, physicality, tackling in the run game. And then at the Senior Bowl, he showed up and he was one of the best players in attendance of everyone there. So I just think he's a super safe prospect who can excel in any phase of the game. And maybe Morig does end up being the better prospect if he fixes the tackling slight tackling issues he has. But I just think Grant is so well-rounded.
Yeah, so I think for me, why I have Morig as my safety 1, like you said, we have the same grade on him, but we do highly value tackling and safeties, and Morig does struggle with that at times, but he flashes the potential as a tackler. There are plays where he makes the tackles, he wraps guys up and takes them down right away. So it's not the fact that he can't tackle, it's just that he doesn't do it every play. There are times where he just completely whiffs. So he just needs to get more consistent with his tackling. But I think, his speed, his athleticism are really good, exactly what you want from a safety position. And then I also think that he displays a great mind. I think he diagnoses routes and the run game really, really well. So I think for me, if his tackling was all shored up, he'd probably have a first-round grade. But it is that that tackling issue that we both have as a concern for me that gives him the 2.2. For Richie Grant, I think that I kind of saw the same thing that you saw. I just think for me the ceiling's a little bit lower
Yeah.
than it is for you. So I feel like if I repeat, I'm gonna end up repeating most of the stuff you said. I just think Morik has a higher ceiling than Grant does, and I thought that Grant's talents kind of, in my opinion at least, gave him 2.3.
Yeah, I think we analyze the two players completely the same. It's just about how you hash out what you see and what you value in terms of ceiling and well-roundedness and all that. And I mean, unless there's something else you want to say, I think we can wrap this up.
Yeah, I think that kind of was our whole top 12 at each position. Like I said at the beginning of the podcast, if you want to see our full positional rankings, go check it out on our Instagram page, Bold Take Scouting. It's right up there. Wait, there, got it. And then also tomorrow we'll be posting our big boards. So be sure to look out for that. That'll be our top 150 players. And the last point that I want to end this podcast on, since we're talking about all our positional rankings, on all our grades, obviously, like there were players that we disagreed on with what we saw on film with Monty Rice especially. But even with grades, even if you end up seeing the exact same thing on film, it comes down to interpretation, like you said a minute ago. And I think that's something that you really have to take into account when you're discussing your evaluations with other scouts. I think you can see the exact same thing, but depending on what traits you value more and how you see their game translating to the NFL can determine what grade you have on a player.
Yeah, I totally agree. And just stay tuned for everything that's to come this week. We've got the big boards tomorrow. We've got a nice rumor mill for you to finalize your mock drafts with on Wednesday, and on Sunday and on Thursday. We'll be each releasing a 7-round mock draft. Really excited about that. It's currently under construction, so stay tuned. It's an exciting week in the NFL world and at Bold Take Scouting as the draft approaches with the first round on Thursday night. Thanks for watching, guys.
And the last thing I just want to say, if you're listening to this podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, I would encourage you to watch it on our YouTube channel instead, if you can, because
a little too late now.
What?
A little too late now.
Well, but in the future.
Oh yeah.
Because we'll be putting up our big boards, our rankings and stuff like that, and obviously that's something visual, and you're only going to be able to see that on YouTube. But regardless of where you watch it or listen to it, thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back after the draft for our draft grades and analysis of what seems like is going to be a crazy end of the draft season.
Yep.